What if I told you that the Israel you see today with its modern cities, European faces, and powerful armies might not look anything like the Israel of the Bible? Imagine Abraham, the father of nations, not as the pale figure you've seen in paintings, but as a man of deep bronze skin, born under the fierce sun of ancient lands. Imagine Moses leading a people who looked far closer to Africa than to Europe. But here is the shock when you turn on the news, when you see the government officials, the soldiers, the influencers shaping modern Israel. You see something entirely different. Lighter skin, European features, Western mannerisms. So the question burns, who are these white Israelis? Are they the descendants of the ancient tribes of Jacob, or are they part of a history rewritten by migration, empire, and power? For centuries, voices have been silenced, stories buried, and bloodlines forgotten. The journey from ancient black Hebrews to modern white Israelis is not just history, it's a mystery of identity, politics, and survival. Tonight we are not simply talking about race. We are opening a sealed vault of history that challenges everything you thought you knew about the Holy Land. Are you ready to step into the shadows of Jerusalem's forgotten past? Because once you see what lies behind the faces of modern Israel, you might never look at the Bible or history the same way again. Stay with me, because the truth you are about to hear is far older, far deeper, and far more dangerous than anyone has told you. Part 1. The African Roots of Ancient Israel. History does not begin in a vacuum. It begins with soil, with blood, with faces carved by the sun. And when we trace the origins of Israel, we find a story written not in marble palaces, but in the dust of the Middle East and the rich, dark earth of Africa. Archaeologists believe early Israelites shared DNA patterns with North African tribes. This discovery alone challenges the conventional images that many of us grew up with, images of pale patriarchs and fair-skinned prophets. But when we peel back the layers of time, a different truth emerges. The earliest Israelites were deeply connected to Africa. Abraham, the father of faith, was not a European nobleman but a Semitic wanderer. Born in the city of Ur, a place closer in culture and climate to ancient Mesopotamia and the Nile than to Europe, Abraham's lineage connects him to the Afro-Asiatic peoples. Scholars argue that the Semitic languages themselves, including Hebrew, are branches of a linguistic tree with roots reaching into North Africa. When Abraham left Ur to travel through the desert into Canaan, he carried with him a heritage steeped in the cultures of both Africa and the Middle East. Jacob, later named Israel, was born into this heritage. His sons, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes, lived in an age when borders were fluid and cultural exchange was constant. The Israelites were shepherds, traders, and survivors. They lived alongside Egyptians, Nubians, and other African peoples. In fact, many biblical accounts, from Joseph rising to power in Egypt to Moses being raised in Pharaoh's house, take place in African settings. The stories we know as Israelite history cannot be separated from Africa. Imagine Joseph, son of Jacob, standing under the blazing Egyptian sun, speaking the language of the Nile, dressed like a high-ranking Egyptian official. His descendants, including Moses, would have known no cultural separation between the African and Semitic worlds. This was not a foreign land. It was part of the environment that shaped them. Perhaps the most striking symbol of this Afro-Semitic connection is the legendary meeting of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Sheba, believed by many historians to be located in the region of modern Ethiopia or Yemen, represents the southern gateway where Africa and the Middle East intertwine. The Bible describes the Queen of Sheba as bringing spices, gold, and wisdom from her land to Jerusalem, and many Ethiopian traditions claim that her union with Solomon produced a royal bloodline that still holds cultural significance today. This connection is not merely a romantic tale, it speaks to a deeper reality. The ancient Israelites were not isolated. They were a people of trade routes and caravan paths, sharing bloodlines and ideas with Africa. Ethiopia, in particular, holds one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, the Beta Israel or Falasha, who preserve customs and traditions that date back thousands of years. When we look at ancient depictions in hieroglyphics, reliefs, and early manuscripts, we see a variety of skin tones. Darker hues were not an anomaly, they were the norm. The Israelites were shaped by the same sun and soil as their African neighbors. Yet today, when we think of Israel, we see a different image, one that is overwhelmingly European in appearance. How did we get here? How did the image of Israel shift from a people deeply intertwined with Africa to the predominantly white faces we see in modern Israel? Is this just the result of centuries of migration, or is there more to the story? Consider this. African DNA markers have been found in certain Jewish populations, confirming ancient intermarriage and cultural blending. Genetic studies point to the Lemba tribe in southern Africa, who carry traditions of Jewish dietary laws and even genetic links to the ancient priestly line of Levi. These findings are not fringe theories. They are peer-reviewed studies published by leading scholars. But these truths rarely make headlines. They do not fit the narrative of a European-centered Israel. For centuries, art and media in the West have portrayed biblical figures as fair-skinned, often to align with European audiences. But what happens when we strip away that lens? What happens when we see Abraham, Jacob, and Moses as they likely were men of brown and black skin, shaped by a world that was as much African as it was Semitic? This is not about race, it's about truth. It's about reclaiming a history that has been oversimplified and at times deliberately rewritten. When we acknowledge the African roots of ancient Israel, we open the door to understanding not only where these people came from, but how they interacted with the world around them. Imagine walking through the streets of ancient Jerusalem. You would see traders from Nubia, artisans from Egypt, and priests who carried the memory of deserts and rivers stretching across 2 continents. Israel was never just a single look, it was a tapestry woven from African and Middle Eastern threads. And yet if you walk through the streets of Jerusalem today, the faces you see look nothing like this past. The government officials, the soldiers, the media personalities, their features tell a story of Europe, not Africa. So how did this transformation happen? How did the Israel of the Bible become the Israel of today? In the next section, we uncover the paradox of modern Israel, a nation in the Middle East that often looks like it came from Europe. Part 2. The Modern Paradox. Modern Israel is often seen as a nation reborn from the ashes of history, a land resurrected after 2 millennia of exile. But when you look closer at its people, something doesn't add up. The streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are filled with faces that look strikingly European. Blonde hair, pale skin, and blue eyes are not unusual. And yet this is the same land where Abraham once walked, where desert heat and Semitic bloodlines shaped the people of the Bible. 75% of Israel's population is Jewish, but the majority have European features, not Middle Eastern or African. This paradox is impossible to ignore. A nation geographically and historically rooted in the Middle East appears, at least on the surface, more like a European enclave. When you see Israeli Defense Force soldiers with light hair and fair skin standing in the midst of Arab neighbors, Palestinians, Jordanians, Bedouins, the contrast is startling. It almost feels as if 2 worlds are colliding in the same patch of land. This is not just about appearance, it's about identity. Who gets to claim the title descendants of Israel? How did a land once filled with darker-skinned Semitic tribes transform into a country where European features dominate its political and cultural elite? The answer lies in history, a long, complicated, and often painful story of exile, migration, and adaptation. After the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Jewish communities were scattered across the globe. While some remained in the Middle East or North Africa, many found refuge in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. Over centuries, intermarriage and assimilation altered physical appearances, blending Jewish ancestry with European genetics. But this raises deeper questions. Did these communities preserve the authentic heritage of ancient Israel, or did centuries in Europe create a new hybrid identity that now defines modern Israel? Modern Israel, established in 1948, was built on the dream of gathering the Jewish diaspora into one homeland. But the leadership of this movement, known as Zionism, was largely European, spearheaded by Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern and Central Europe. These were people who spoke Yiddish, who lived for centuries under Russian, Polish, and German rule, and who carried with them the cultural imprints of Europe. When they returned to the Holy Land, they didn't just bring faith, they brought a European mindset. Western architecture, Western dress, and Western politics became the foundation of the modern state. The result: a nation that sits in the Middle East but in many ways feels like an outpost of Europe. Look at Israel's media, its government officials, its corporate and military leaders. The dominant narrative is often shaped by Ashkenazi voices. Meanwhile, Jews of Middle Eastern or African descent, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Ethiopian, have historically been marginalized or pressured to assimilate. And yet this paradox runs deeper. While modern Israel has a strong national identity, there remains an unspoken question: whose Israel is this? Is it the Israel of the Bible, a Semitic people rooted in the soil of Canaan? Or is it the Israel of 20th century Europe, a creation of survivors who rebuilt their homeland but reshaped its image to reflect their own heritage? Consider the cultural landscape. Tel Aviv is often described as a European-style city filled with cafes, high-rises, and Western trends. Meanwhile, just beyond its borders are Arab villages and ancient ruins that tell an entirely different story. It is as if Israel exists in two timelines at once, one ancient brown and biblical, the other modern white and Western. This contrast has sparked uncomfortable debates both inside and outside of Israel. Some critics argue that modern Israel, in its quest for survival, has distanced itself from the Semitic and African roots of its faith and history. Others claim that this evolution was inevitable, that centuries of diaspora naturally led to the blending of cultures and appearances. But here is what we cannot ignore. The ancient Israelites, as we explored in Part 1, were a people of the desert and the Nile with deep ties to Africa and the Middle East. Today, that image is nearly unrecognizable. This raises powerful questions. Has history been sanitized to present a more acceptable European face of Israel to the West? What does it mean for the descendants of African and Middle Eastern Jews who see themselves erased from the mainstream narrative? Travel to Jerusalem's Old City and you'll see it. Amid the narrow stone streets where Arabs and Orthodox Jews pass each other, the tension between East and West, past and present, is palpable. A blonde-haired soldier stands guard in front of the Western Wall, the last remnant of the ancient temple where men like Solomon and Jeremiah prayed. It's a moment of dissonance. The landscape screams ancient Semitic history, but the faces represent centuries of European exile. To truly understand this paradox, we need to follow the thread back in time to a people who didn't start in the Holy Land, but came from the steppes of Central Asia and the forests of Eastern Europe. Their story, filled with conversions, migrations, and survival, will forever change how you see modern Israel. In Part 3, we uncover the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews, the white Europeans who now shape much of Israel's identity. And what you'll hear next might surprise you. Part 3. The Rise of Ashkenazi Jews. The story of modern Israel cannot be told without the Ashkenazi Jews, a community whose journey did not begin in the hills of Judea or the deserts of Sinai, but in the cold forests and grasslands of Eastern Europe. Their rise to prominence is both a tale of survival and a narrative twist that challenges the very idea of what it means to be a descendant of ancient Israel. In the 8th century, far from the Holy Land, there existed a powerful and mysterious empire called Khazaria. Located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, the Khazars were a Turkic people who built a wealthy and strategic kingdom. They controlled vital trade routes connecting Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. But what sets them apart in history is a bold decision made by their rulers, the conversion to Judaism. Unlike the Israelites of old, the Khazars were not descendants of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. They were warriors, merchants, and diplomats, outsiders to the faith. Yet sometime during the reign of King Bulan, the Khazar elite officially adopted Judaism, possibly to remain politically neutral between Christian Byzantium and the Islamic Caliphate. Could modern Israel's ruling elite be descendants of converts, not the tribes of Moses? This question strikes at the core of identity. If the Ashkenazi Jews, who form a large part of Israel's leadership today, trace part of their lineage to the Khazars, what does this mean for the concept of a chosen people? Following the decline of Khazaria in the 10th century, many Jewish families migrated westward into the territories of Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, and later Germany. These communities became known as the Ashkenazi Jews, named after Ashkenaz, a medieval Hebrew term for Germany. Over centuries, they grew into one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. Unlike the Jews of North Africa or the Middle East, who retained Semitic features in languages like Hebrew or Arabic, the Ashkenazi developed a unique cultural identity. They spoke Yiddish, a language blending medieval German with Hebrew, Aramaic, and Slavic influences. They built thriving communities in European cities from Krakow to Vilnius, adapting to the cold climates and complex politics of the region. The Ashkenazi story is one of resilience. For centuries, they endured persecution from pogroms in Russia to forced ghettos in Poland. Their survival was not just physical, but cultural. They developed distinct religious traditions, from liturgical melodies to meticulous interpretations of Jewish law. Their synagogues echoed with prayers that carried both the memory of the temple in Jerusalem and the hardships of European exile. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Ashkenazi population had grown dramatically. They produced influential thinkers, scientists, and writers, from Albert Einstein to Sigmund Freud, whose ideas reshaped the modern world. But they also suffered unimaginable tragedies, culminating in the Holocaust, where millions were exterminated under Nazi rule. It was from the ashes of this catastrophe that the modern state of Israel was born in 1948. And at the forefront of its founding were Ashkenazi Jews, whose European heritage and organizational power shaped the new nation. Today, Ashkenazi Jews form a majority of Israel's political, economic, and military elite. From prime ministers to high-ranking generals, their influence is undeniable. Yet this dominance has often overshadowed other Jewish groups, including Sephardi Mizrahi and Ethiopian Jews. The paradox is striking. A people whose history is rooted in Europe now define the identity of a nation situated in the heart of the Middle East. Their customs, language, and even food bear traces of their European past. Walk into a bakery in Tel Aviv, and you might find bagels, a staple of Eastern European Jewish cuisine, alongside Middle Eastern pita. This complex history has fueled debates about authenticity. Are Ashkenazi Jews truly the direct heirs of Moses and Abraham, or are they descendants of a conversion movement that adopted the faith centuries later? Most historians agree that Ashkenazi Jews are a mix. Some carry ancient Israelite bloodlines, while others are descendants of Khazars and other European groups who joined the Jewish faith. This does not diminish their Jewish identity, but it complicates the narrative. It challenges the assumption that all Jews look or come from the same background. But Ashkenazi Jews are not the whole story. There are other Jewish communities who never left the warmth of the Middle East, or Africa communities who kept their original skin tones and traditions, often at a great cost. In Part 4, we uncover the journey of the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews groups who faced the painful reality of whitening themselves to survive in a nation dominated by Ashkenazi ideals. Part 4. Sephardi and Mizrahi. Whitening to survive. When Israel was founded in 1948, it was not simply a return of all Jews to their ancient homeland. It was a collision of worlds. Jews came from every corner of the globe, from Europe, yes, but also from North Africa, the Middle East, and even India and Persia. Among them were the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews communities with deep roots in the warm, sun-scorched lands that had once cradled the stories of the Bible. They were the living bridge between the ancient Semitic world and modern Israel. But when they arrived, they found a nation shaped by European ideals, and they quickly realized that survival required more than faith. It required transformation. In the 1950s, Israel pushed immigrants to abandon their language's dress and even facial features to look more European. This was not a written law, but it was a social reality. The young state, led by Ashkenazi elites, wanted to project a modern Western image to the world. For Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews whose skin was darker, whose accents were Arabic or Persian, and whose traditions felt foreign to the European leaders, assimilation was not optional, it was expected. The Sephardi Jews traced their lineage to Spain and Portugal, where they had lived for centuries, until the Inquisition forced them to flee in the late 15th century. Many sought refuge in North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and the Middle East. They carried with them the Ladino language, a beautiful blend of Hebrew, Spanish, and Arabic, and rich traditions of poetry, music, and scholarship. When they arrived in Israel after 1948, they believed they were returning home to a land of shared heritage. Instead, they found themselves treated as second-class citizens by the Ashkenazi establishment. Their language, Ladino, was dismissed as outdated. Their food, music, and customs were considered too Arab. The Mizrahi Jews coming from countries like Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, and Egypt faced a similar struggle. Many of them arrived as refugees expelled from their homelands after the creation of Israel. They brought with them centuries of Middle Eastern culture songs sung in Arabic traditional robes and skin tones that reflected the deserts they came from. But in Israel, these signs of identity were often seen as a threat. The Ashkenazi leaders, wanting to distance the new state from its Arab neighbors, pushed for a process of westernization. Arabic was suppressed, traditional clothing was abandoned, and even family names were changed to sound more modern and European. The pressure to assimilate went beyond culture. It extended to physical appearance. Stories still circulate of immigrants being encouraged to undergo nose surgeries to look less Middle Eastern. Families were told to give their children Hebrew names that sounded modern instead of preserving their ancestral ones. This drive for whitening wasn't just cosmetic. It was deeply psychological. Many Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews felt they had to erase parts of their identity to gain acceptance. It was as if their rich history, the centuries of survival through exile in Muslim lands, was suddenly an embarrassment in the new European-style Israel. Yet these communities did not disappear. Over time, they began reclaiming their culture, reviving their languages, and demanding recognition. Today, the sounds of Ladino songs and Mizrahi music can be heard on Israeli radio. Moroccan Jewish cuisine has become a staple of modern Israeli dining. But this revival came after decades of struggle and discrimination. This is the paradox. While the Ashkenazi narrative dominates politics and global media, the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews represent the living heartbeat of the ancient Middle East. Their skin tones, their rhythms, and their stories connect modern Israel to its biblical past in ways that European Jews never could. But here lies a deeper tension. If Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews had to become white to fit in, what does that say about the authenticity of modern Israeli identity? Can a nation that prides itself on ancient roots truly honor those roots if it forces some of its own people to shed them? The history of whitening is not just a cultural footnote, it is a reminder that power often shapes identity. The faces of Israel today are not just the result of history, they are the result of choices, pressures, and at times deliberate erasure. But if Mizrahi Jews were pushed to look European to survive, what about the Jews who could never pass as white? What about those whose skin remained a bold testament to their African heritage, and who faced not just cultural erasure, but outright racism? In Part 5, we step into the story of Black Jews, a community that has fought not just for recognition, but for the right to exist in the land they call home. Part 5, Racism against Black Jews. When the first Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel, arrived in Israel in large numbers during the late 20th century, they believed they were coming home. For centuries, these Jews had lived in the highlands of Ethiopia, preserving ancient customs, dietary laws, and a faith that connected them to the stories of Moses and King Solomon. To them, Israel was not a foreign land, but the promised land of their ancestors. Yet what awaited them was not the warm embrace of a spiritual homeland. It was suspicion, marginalization, and in many cases outright racism. Even soldiers serving the Israeli army face racism if their skin is black. The Beta Israel community traces its origins to ancient times, possibly to the era of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, or even earlier. Their traditions include observing Sabbath circumcision and dietary laws similar to those of the Torah, all of which predate modern rabbinic Judaism. In the 1980s and 1990s, daring rescue operations such as Operation Moses 1984 and Operation Solomon 1991 airlifted tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. These missions were hailed worldwide as heroic acts of bringing home lost tribes. But once they set foot in Israel, Beta Israel discovered that their Jewishness was questioned by the Ashkenazi religious authorities. Many were forced to undergo symbolic conversions to be considered fully Jewish, an act that deeply insulted their identity. Racism wasn't limited to religious disputes. Ethiopian Jews were often placed in isolated settlements, denied equal access to education and jobs, and stereotyped as backward or uneducated. Even when they served in the Israeli Defense Forces, a path many young Israelis take to prove their loyalty, their skin color remained a barrier. The most painful examples came to light in the mid-2010s with cases that shook the nation. Damas Pakata, 2015. A young Ethiopian soldier wearing his IDF uniform was beaten by Israeli police without provocation. Video footage of the assault sparked national outrage and led to massive protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Solomon Teka, 2019. A 19-year-old Ethiopian Israeli was shot and killed by an off-duty police officer. His death ignited weeks of demonstrations as thousands of Ethiopian Jews filled the streets demanding justice and equality. These events revealed a harsh reality. Even when Ethiopian Jews fought for Israel, lived by its laws, and wore its uniform, they were still treated as outsiders. The Ethiopian Jewish struggle is not just about racism, it is about identity. For Beta Israel, being Jewish is not a label. It is a lineage carried through centuries of isolation, persecution, and faith. Yet in modern Israel, their narrative is often overshadowed by the Ashkenazi and Sephardi stories. Many Ethiopian families still face discrimination in housing, employment, and education. Activists have accused the state of systemic prejudice, pointing to studies that reveal Ethiopian Israelis earn far less than their Ashkenazi counterparts. In some cases, their blood donations were secretly discarded by health services in the 1990s under the unfounded fear of disease. These actions left deep scars, fueling distrust and anger. Despite these struggles, the Ethiopian Jewish community has worked tirelessly to preserve its traditions and share its unique heritage. Their music, liturgy, and food, from the distinctive injera bread to ancient Hebrew chants, are slowly gaining recognition in Israeli society. Young Ethiopian Israelis are also breaking barriers, entering politics, sports, and entertainment while using their platforms to highlight the challenges their community faces. The treatment of Black Jews forces Israel to confront a difficult question. Can it claim to be the homeland of all Jews if some of its Jewish citizens feel like strangers in their own country? The story of Beta Israel is a test of Israel's moral and spiritual integrity, a reminder that the land of the prophets must also be a land of justice. The paradox becomes even sharper when you consider that some of the earliest Israelites, as we explored in Part 1, were likely closer in appearance to the Ethiopian Jews than to many modern Ashkenazi leaders. In a sense, Beta Israel is not just a minority, they are living echoes of what ancient Israel may have looked like. But if the story of Beta Israel is challenging, there is another community that is even more controversial, a group that claims not only to be Jewish, but to be the true Israelites. They are not recognized by the state, they face legal battles and cultural rejection, yet their conviction runs deep. In Part 6, we explore the rise of the Black Hebrews, a community whose claim to the ancient covenant threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about Israel's identity. Part 6. The Black Hebrews, Exiles or Originals. The story of the Black Hebrews is one of faith, identity, and defiance, a movement born out of the civil rights era in America, yet reaching back thousands of years into biblical history. They are not simply asking for recognition. They are making a claim that challenges the very foundations of Jewish and Israeli identity. In the 1960s, amidst racial tension and the fight for equality in the United States, a small group of African Americans began to question the narrative that they were disconnected from the ancient people of the Bible. These men and women, led by figures such as Ben Ami Ben Israel, believed they were descendants of the original Israelites, the tribes who crossed deserts, who were exiled, and whose stories were recorded in the Hebrew Scriptures. For them, the transatlantic slave trade was not just a historical tragedy, but a continuation of the biblical pattern of Israel's suffering and exile. They claimed that African Americans were among the lost tribes, the true heirs of the covenant made with Abraham. By the late 1960s, this conviction turned into action. A group of followers left the U.S., first settling in Liberia and later moving to the city of Dimona in southern Israel. They called themselves the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, or simply the Black Hebrews. DNA studies show connections between African Americans and ancient Semitic tribes. Though controversial, some genetic studies have found markers among certain African American populations that trace back to Middle Eastern and North African regions, supporting at least partially the idea of ancient Semitic ancestry. While the scientific evidence is still debated, the cultural and spiritual conviction of the Black Hebrews remains unshaken. Upon their arrival in Israel, the Black Hebrews expected to be welcomed as long-lost relatives returning to the land of their ancestors. Instead, they faced skepticism and legal barriers. Israel's law of return, which grants automatic citizenship to Jews, did not recognize them as authentic Jews. The rabbinate, dominated by Ashkenazi authorities, questioned their lineage, arguing that their faith practices did not align with mainstream Judaism. For years, they lived in legal limbo, denied citizenship, facing the constant threat of deportation. Despite these hardships, the community built a self-sustaining life in Dimona. They established schools, farms, and businesses, creating a unique culture that blended African traditions with Hebrew customs. Their lifestyle, marked by veganism, communal living, and strict moral codes, set them apart not only from Israelis, but also from African Americans back home. The Black Hebrews' claim to be the true Israelites has made them both fascinating and controversial. If their claim were accepted, it would mean re-examining centuries of assumptions about Jewish identity. Who gets to decide who is a Jew? Is it bloodline, culture, faith, or all three? Their presence has also forced Israel to confront uncomfortable questions about race and history. In a nation already wrestling with the paradox of European-looking Jews in a Middle Eastern landscape, the Black Hebrews add another layer of complexity. They are a reminder that Israel's identity is not as straightforward as official narratives suggest. Over time, the Israeli government has made concessions. In 2003, the Black Hebrews were granted permanent residency, and in 2013, a few members were allowed to enlist in the Israel Defense Forces. While they still lack full citizenship, these steps mark a slow shift toward recognition. Yet even as they gain a foothold, they remain outsiders in many ways, culturally, socially, and politically. They are admired for their discipline and community values, but they are also viewed with suspicion for their refusal to fully assimilate. The story of the Black Hebrews is not just about one community. It reflects a deeper global question: who are the descendants of the Bible? Are they only those who trace their lineage through European rabbinic tradition? Or could the true children of Israel be scattered across Africa, the Americas, and beyond their history, hidden their identity, erased by centuries of conquest and colonization? If the Black Hebrews are even partially correct, what does that mean for the identity of Israel today? Does it mean that the modern state of Israel has overlooked or even silenced the voices of those who carry the ancient bloodline? The answer is not simple, but one thing is clear. The existence of the Black Hebrews forces us to question everything we thought we knew about race, religion, and the very definition of God's chosen people. In Part 7, we will confront the ultimate question of power and identity. Who is the true Israel, and how has politics, migration, and history reshaped the meaning of that name? Part 7. Identity, Power, and the Forgotten Story. Who is the real Israel? This question lingers like a shadow across history, faith, and politics. It is not just about ancestry or religion. It is about the narratives that shape nations, the power to define truth, and the voices that get silenced along the way. For centuries, the story of Israel has been told through the lens of those who hold the pen. Ancient scrolls, medieval chronicles, modern textbooks, each era has reinterpreted what it means to be the chosen people. But when we peel back the layers, we discover a more complex, uncomfortable reality. History has layers, and the loudest voice may not be the oldest truth. The Bible describes Israel not just as a land, but as a covenant people, descendants of Jacob, bound to God through faith and obedience. Yet over thousands of years, exile scattered these people across continents. Some became Ashkenazi Jews in Europe, others Sephardi Jews in North Africa and Spain, and still others like the Beta Israel and Black Hebrews kept traditions far from Jerusalem's walls. So who among them holds the purest claim? Is it those with unbroken bloodlines? Or is it those who preserve the faith even when stripped of everything else? Or perhaps, as the prophets suggest, is Israel defined not by skin or origin, but by the heart, by who remains faithful to the God of Abraham? Modern Israel is as much a political creation as it is a spiritual homeland. The 20th century return of Jews to the Holy Land was not a simple homecoming, but a response to centuries of persecution, especially the Holocaust. The Ashkenazi leaders who built the state carried both trauma and determination. In their urgency to create a modern nation, they prioritized strength, military power, and Western alliances. Yet in doing so, the voices of other Jewish communities darker-skinned, rooted in Africa or the Middle East, were often pushed to the margins. History teaches us that when nations are forged, some narratives are celebrated while others are buried. Consider this: migration didn't just reshape Israel's demographics, it reshaped its identity. The influx of European Jews gave Israel a Western face, one that resonated with global powers, but sometimes conflicted with its Middle Eastern roots. The Sephardi, Mizrahi, and Beta Israel Jews who came later often felt like guests in a home that was supposed to be theirs. We cannot talk about modern Israel without confronting the role of race. The tension between European-looking Israelis and darker-skinned Jews is not just cultural, it reflects centuries of colonial attitudes, assimilation pressures, and global politics. In a world where whiteness often equates to power, even a nation built on ancient faith is not immune to the forces of prejudice. But here's the irony. The earliest Israelites, as we explored in Part 1, likely looked far closer to the African and Mizrahi Jews than to the pale faces we often see representing Israel today. The modern image of Israel is in many ways a reconstruction shaped by migration, survival, and the need to appeal to Western allies. Hidden within this grand narrative are stories that rarely get told: the farmers of Yemen who prayed under the same stars as Abraham, the Ethiopian families who carried Torah traditions through centuries of isolation, the African American communities who claim that their ancestors were scattered tribes of Israel. These stories matter because they remind us that Israel is not a single-color culture or language. It is a tapestry woven with threads of exile and return, suffering and hope, faith and defiance. To ignore these stories is to ignore the fullness of Israel's identity. So who is the real Israel? Maybe the answer is not found in genetics or politics, but in remembering those who were forgotten. Maybe it is about recognizing that identity is not a fixed line in the sand, but a living story, one that belongs to all who carry the covenant in their hearts, regardless of their skin or accent. And this is where the real challenge lies. When history is controlled by the powerful, it often erases the voices of the humble. But as the prophets remind us, God often chooses the quiet, the overlooked, the ones who are not seen. The question is not just who is Israel, but who gets to define the story of God's chosen. Is it the state, the scholars, the rabbis? Or is it something much older and deeper? A truth written in both blood and faith, waiting to be rediscovered. Stay with me, because what comes next is more than history. It's a message for every soul that has ever felt forgotten. A message that speaks especially to those who have lived long enough to see how truth can be reshaped. And this message for the older hearts listening now might just be the key to seeing Israel and yourself in a whole new light. The story of Israel, from its African roots to the modern struggles of identity and race, is not just about history. It is about us. It teaches that truth is layered and the loudest voices are not always the truest. For older generations, this journey is a reminder that life, like history, is often rewritten by power and perception, but the deeper truths remain waiting for those who seek them. We learn that identity is not skin deep. It is carried in faith, resilience, and the courage to preserve what is sacred even when the world tries to erase it. The struggles of the Ethiopian Jews. The journey of the Sephardi and Mizrahi and the conviction of the Black Hebrews remind us that belonging is not always given. Sometimes it must be claimed with dignity and perseverance. For those who have lived long lives, this message is clear: your story, your faith, and your wisdom matter. Even if the world overlooks you, your legacy, like Israel's, is built on endurance, sacrifice, and hope. The past cannot be changed, but what you choose to remember, honor, and pass on can shape the future.